composition where we may have to restrict the domains. Let's look at the composition of f of g of x. So I'm going to take the g function and put it inside the f function. So this becomes f of g of x, which is 1 over 1 plus x. So now I'm going to take this, put it in for x in the f function. So this is going to be 1 minus 1 over 1 plus x divided by x, which is my input here. So that's still going to be 1 over 1 plus x. So we got this tricky fraction that we need to simplify. The common denominator for the top is going to be 1 plus x over 1 plus x. That's why I'm going to multiply 1 by here, because my common denominator is 1 plus x. So it's going to be 1 plus x over 1 plus x minus 1 over 1 plus x over 1 over 1 plus x. In my next step, I'm going to make these denominators the same, and I'm going to simplify the top. So I'm going to have 1 plus x minus 1 over 1 plus x. Now, I'm also dividing by this fraction on the bottom, so I can reciprocate it, flip it over, and multiply it. So I'm going to do that at this time. 1 plus x over 1. This simplifies to be, this is going to be reduced to x. I'm going to have 1 plus x here times 1 plus x over 1. And we can see that this all simplifies, when we cancel these two, to be x. However, we need to make sure that we restrict our domain. Here, in my g function, I know that 1 plus x cannot be equal to 0 because I'm not allowed to divide by 0. Subtracting 1 on both sides solves this little mini equation, recognizing that x cannot be equal to negative 1. So this is my initial restriction on my domain. I have no restriction on my composition. So therefore, this is the only restriction I have. So I can say at the very end, f of g of x is equal to x. However, x cannot be equal to negative 1. Let's look at the composition the other way. I'm going to do g of f of x. So here, g of my f function, which is going to be 1 minus x over x. This becomes my input into my g function here of x. So that's equal to 1 over 1 plus 1 minus x over x. Again, I have to do a little bit of algebra to make sure that I can simplify this properly. So I'm going to do the common denominator on the bottom. I'm going to multiply this by x over x. So that's just going to be x over x plus 1 minus x over x. So I'm just changing this 1 to x over x so that I have the common denominator here and here. Simplifying the denominator, I'm going to have x here plus 1 minus x all over x. And this simplifies to be 1 over x. Okay, so 1 over x is equal to 1 divided by 1 over x, which is equal to 1 times x over 1. And that's just going to simplify to x. So I know that my composition, g of f of x, is equal to x. However, I do have a restriction on my domain. I know that in my f of x function, which was the input into my function, that was equal to 1 minus x over x. And here, x cannot be equal to 0. Since I have no restriction on my composition, this ends up being the only restriction that I have here. If we're going to write this in interval notation, we would say that it works for all real numbers up to 0, and then from 0 to infinity. And this is our interval notation.